checkpoint where we see Israeli soldiers who wave us through. They don't even check. The scenery begins to change. We have the Palestinian village of Jabba on one hand. On the other side, we see Tzurif, another Palestinian village. The guide tells us that we're now in the West Bank. The incline gets even steeper. And then we find ourselves at a traffic circle. There's Kibbutz Kfar Etzion. There's a lone shvut where I live. We see a sign for Kibbutz Rosh Tzorim. And then the bus, as we are at the top of the mountain range, literally, very high up, the bus turns off onto a dirt road, and it's pretty muddy in this season. It's bumpy also. We travel just for 3 minutes, perhaps 4. We get out of the bus, and the guide shows us where we're going. We see we're in the middle of farmland, lots of different Palestinian farmsteads. They're surrounded, many of them, by stone fences with a metal gate. We walk into one of those farmsteads, and we see a few animals as we'd expect. We see trees like an orchard, and we also see a Jewish Beit Midrash, a study hall. That's pretty strange to find in a Palestinian farmstead. We see also a classroom. What is a classroom doing in a farm? We see also a kitchen, bathrooms, an office. What's going on here? We sit down in the kitchen. We sit down in the classroom, and I want to tell you where we are. We are in, I said, the West Bank. In the West Bank live Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs very, very close to each other, but very, very far away. Geographically close, but in every other sense of the word, light years apart. So some of the things I'm about to say, the two sides, the Israeli Jews and the Palestinian Arabs, speak different languages, and they have different cultures and different religions. Did you know that they have separate health systems? That means the doctor, the dentist, the hospitals there in the West Bank, you'll never find a Jew in the same waiting room with a Palestinian Arab. Two separate health frameworks. Transportation is also separate, whether it's buses or taxis, completely separate. And it is true that we drive on the same roads, the two sides, sometimes. But even when we drive on the same roads, we have different color license plates. So you know who the other is. The educational systems, whether it's preschool, elementary school, middle school, high school, up to university, is completely separate. We have different calendars also. When people go to work, when they're off from school, completely separate. We even sometimes have different times on our watches, the Israeli Jews and the Palestinian Arabs, because this side and that side switch to and from daylight savings time, different days during different weeks, sometimes different months. The economic systems are completely different. The products that the two sides buy in their respective supermarkets are completely different. And of course, I didn't mention that the two sides live under different legal systems. The Israeli Jews who live there in the West Bank, like me, are citizens of the state of Israel. They have full legal, political, and civil rights, voting in elections pretty often. By the way, today were elections in Israel, local elections, while the Palestinians living right on the other side of the intersection are citizens of no country with no civil and legal and political rights. And there, these two enemies are living on the same piece of land very, very close. So what does that engender? You know the answer to my question. Ignorance of the other side and stereotypes, bigotry, what Americans would call racism, and a lot of resentment, fear, and hate. And I want to make it clear that fear kills. People kill because they're afraid of being killed, and people are killed because they're afraid of being killed. This is very bad news, but it's even worse. There's no common ground, and I do not mean that as a metaphor. I mean ground. Real estate. Israeli military law that governs the lives of both Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs in the West Bank. We forgot to put the map up. I forgot to cue you. Look at that. Soon the map will be up, and you'll understand what I'm talking about a little better. So Israeli military law proclaims very clearly that Israeli Jews are not permitted to enter Palestinian towns, cities, villages, hamlets. And that same law proclaims that Palestinian Arabs are not allowed in Israeli settlements, towns, cities, villages, except if they have a work permit and they're menial workers under armed guard during work hours, but otherwise not. And by the way, since the 7th of October, there are no work permits. So no one from this side is working in the areas of the other side. So where we are now, the classroom, is between Bethlehem and Hebron. What this all means is that had there been a strange Israeli like me, and let's say a strange Palestinian like Noor, who wanted to have a cup of coffee together, there's no place to do it. There's no place to do it. Until 10 years and 2 months ago, when we founded the only joint Israeli-Palestinian community center in the whole West Bank. That's where you're sitting right now. It's the only joint space in the whole West Bank. It's the only place where the two sides can and do come together, neighbors meeting neighbors in dignity and equality. There's no other place. So what happens in the Dignity Center? It's a community center. So what happens there is what happens in any other center, community center around the world. There's a program for little kids twice a month, a little bit of arts and crafts and singing. Israeli kids and Palestinian kids from elementary school are meeting each other. There's the photography workshops for middle school kids. There's the youth movement for high school kids and the alumni. We have photography workshops for women, which are offered by Saskia here, who's been doing it for about 8 years since I met her on a bus in India. That's another story. We have 3 different interfaith dialogue groups. We have monthly discussion groups about politics and about the culture of each side. We learn each other's language. There are a little bit of sporting activities. So what does it look like? Some Israelis may come who've never been to our activities, and some Palestinians may come who've never been. The two sides sit on different sides of the room. They're a little bit hesitant, actually more than a little bit hesitant. You may find a young man or young woman who is elbowing the person who brought them. Why did you bring me here? Look at them, they're going to kill me. We break the ice. It doesn't take more than 1 event or 2 events or maximum 3 events to begin to get over the demonization that we all hold vis-a-vis the other side. They turn out to be human beings. You can talk to them. They're pretty much just like us. And you know what? It's a little bit surprising that they're human beings. And it's a little bit embarrassing. That's a little bit surprising, but it's still surprising. Now I'm going to make the following point. The humanization, getting over the demonization, discovering a human being is very, very important. It's very, very central, but it's not the most important thing that we do in the Dignity Center. There's another level to the work, and that is after you have met, after you've discovered a human being on the other side, you begin to come face to face with the identity of the other side. It turns out that the other side are the bearers of a national, political, religious identity that contradicts mine. And to learn about it, to hear about it is extremely challenging because it seems like the things they're saying are just not true. It can't be. To listen is hard, and then to begin to admit that there is some truth and some legitimacy in the way they understand themselves and in the way they understand me. It's extremely difficult. Why is it so difficult? Well, one way of looking at it is that I believe that most Israelis and most Palestinians, and since October 7th, I would say almost all Israelis and almost all Palestinians are sick in the heart. And this heart disease that courses through our veins and comes right into our chests, the virus, I have a name for it. It's the hubris of exclusivity. The hubris of exclusivity. And it convinces us that I am real and you are fake. My people belong in that land and your people don't. We are true and you are fabricated. And what happens in the activities of the Dignity Center, not always, and not immediately, and it's a long process, but what happens is a little bit of healing in which we come to a place in which I know that my identity is true and glorious, but your identity also has a place in that land, and it's really, really hard. The Dignity Center is operated by Roots, Shorashim, Judur, the Israeli-Palestinian Grassroots Initiative for Understanding, Nonviolence, and Transformation. And now that you know where you're sitting, I can introduce myself. I'm Hanan Schlesinger. As you heard, I've been a rabbi my whole life, and I'm going to, at the outset, say about myself three things. I'm a Jew, I'm a Zionist, and I'm a settler. Let's unpack what I mean by those three labels. When I say I'm a Jew, I am not talking about religion. I'm a religious Jew, but religion is the adjective that goes on to the substratum of my being a Jew. So what does it mean? It means that I'm a member of the Jewish people. What is the Jewish people? It's extended family. We began in the Bible in chapter 12 of Genesis with Abraham and Sarah. They had children, their children had children. They became a clan, a tribe, the 12 tribes of Israel. And the Jewish people understand themselves, ourselves, to be the descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel. So we are an extended family. We're a people. A people is something similar to a nation, not exactly the same thing. And it's very important to emphasize that we're not just a religion and not just a faith, but we have that sense of common destiny, of common fate, that we're going through human history together. And it's not just that the Jewish people are bound each to the other together, but it's also that the Jewish people feel a certain bond to the land in which we were born, the land of Israel, that the Bible calls the land of Canaan. Jews can argue over the connection between the people of Israel and the land of Israel, but there is some type of deep connection. And because of that deep connection, I can, from my personal perspective, move now from talking about myself as a Jew to talking about myself as a Zionist. For me, it's a natural progression. Zionism, for me, is the fulfillment, the culmination of the fullness of Jewish identity. What is Zionism in one sentence? The national liberation movement of the Jewish people, a political platform created about 150 years ago to return the Jewish people home. What do I mean return home? Well, the Jewish people lived in that land for 1,000 years. The first Jewish Commonwealth, the second Jewish Commonwealth, and then in the year 70 of the Common Era, we were exiled by the Roman Empire that destroyed us. We revolted against Rome, and they taught us a lesson. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed, and those who remained were exiled to the Middle East, to Northern Africa, to Europe, later to Australia, to America. And during the past 2,000 years, the vast majority of Jews until the modern era have had a sense that they are not where they're supposed to be. They're not at home. They are in limbo, in exile, in the diaspora. And Jews have been yearning and hoping and praying for all these 2 millennia, L'Shana Haba B'Yushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. The Zionist movement returned about 3 million Jews home, and one of them is standing right here. I was born actually very close to here, believe it or not, Deer Park, Long Island. When I was 18 years old, 19 years old, I got on the plane, I took my 2 bags, and I asiti aliyah. I ascended to the land. That's the term that we Jews use, aliyah, ascent. And it was a sense of fulfilling the visions and the hopes of my great-great-great-great-grandmother and my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. They couldn't do it. They could only yearn about it. And the Zionist movement said, let's stop just praying and yearning and crying. Let's make it happen. And that political movement allowed me to be part of the return of the exiles. For me, that's really, really powerful. I said I'm a Jew. I said I'm a Zionist. And then I said I'm a settler. Settler means that I am an Israeli Jew Israeli citizenship, and I do not live in the state of Israel proper, in the orange here. I rather live in the West Bank. In 1947, the United Nations accepted the partition plan for the British Mandate. There was supposed to be a Palestinian state and a Jewish state. There was a war, and Jordan conquered the West Bank, occupied it for 19 years. The state of Israel was created. And then in 1967, there was a war. We call it the Six-Day War in Israeli parlance. And Israel conquered the West Bank from Jordan and began slowly to allow some of its citizens to cross over the dotted line, which we call the green line, and to settle in the West Bank. So I'm a settler. I've been living there for over 40 years between Bethlehem and Hebron, south of Jerusalem. And I know that calling myself a settler and living where I live, for many people sounds like I'm making a dangerous, radical, extremist political statement. I understand that, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. But now I want to emphasize that from my perspective, more than a political statement, I'm making a historical statement. An historical statement is this: if I've come home after 2,000 years, then I want to come home to the cradle of Jewish civilization. I want to come home to where it all began. And that's not in the coastal cities of Hadera and Ashdod, Tel Aviv. Those cities on the coast are part of the land of Israel. They're part of the state of Israel today, but by and large, Jews never lived there. The Bible is written in the West Bank. The West Bank. Jewish history during the 1,000 years we lived in land mostly happened in the West Bank. The artifacts, the archaeological artifacts we have are in the West Bank. There are so many places around my home in which I can scratch the ground with my heel and come up with pieces of pottery that our ancestors left 2,000 years ago. And that pottery speaks to me. It tells me that you're part of a chain of tradition. You've come home. And for the same reason that I live where I live because of history, I call it what I call it. I usually don't call it the West Bank. I call it Judea and Samaria. And I know that when I say those two words, Judea and Samaria, it again sounds like I'm making a political statement. But for me, again, it's a historical statement. I call it Judea and Samaria because that's what the Jewish people have called it for the past 2,500 years. West Bank is a modern term. It's not a Jewish term. So 2,500 years ago, the Jewish kingdom of Samaria, also called the 10 tribes of Israel, was above Jerusalem. South of Jerusalem was the kingdom of Judea, where I live today. So I call it what I call it for the same reason I live there, because of the sense of historical continuity, the chain of tradition of coming back home and beginning Jewish life in the land where we left off 2,000 years ago. For me, that's really, really big. And then 10 years and 2 months ago, I began to realize that in a certain sense, I don't really know what I'm talking about. And I don't mean that everything I just said was a falsehood. But I do mean that everything I just said was only a partial truth. For 33 years, I'd lived in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and I'd never met a Palestinian. 33 years. And for me, during all those years, like for most of my Jewish neighbors, the Palestinians didn't exist. We lived, and my neighbors still live in their Jewish bubble. The Palestinians are transparent, and we Jews are blind. We don't see. The Palestinians are like the gray, drab scenery that passes in the background of the movie, our movie. They're not part of the plot. You can safely ignore them. And since I began the process of meeting my Palestinian neighbors, I've come to the conclusion that to mistake part of the truth for the whole truth is very close to falsehood, and I don't want to be there any longer. So how did this happen to me? 10 years and 2 months ago, perhaps it was 10 years and 3 months ago, I'm driving in my car in Judea, around where I live, and I have with me 2 evangelical pastors from the US, friends. They believe in the same Bible that we Jews believe in. They know the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel that proclaimed 2.5 millennia ago that one day, after a long, hard exile, the children of Israel, the Jewish people, will come home. And they believe, like I believe, that that homecoming is taking place today through the Zionist movement. And they came on their pilgrimage to the Holy Land to see it, to experience it. They asked me to help them, to show them the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. So I drove them around my car, and we saw the roads that we Jews have paved, and the forest we have planted, and the buildings, the synagogues, the institutions, the houses, the settlements that we have constructed over the past decades. And as we're driving, and I'm showing them around with great pride, I saw a hitchhiker on the side of the road, and I picked him up. And then I saw a second hitchhiker. I picked him up as well. The two young men, after to get out of the car, only after a few minutes, I let them out. We started to drive again. And one of the pastors from Dallas, Texas, then said the following words. He said, Hanan, that was great. You taught us a lesson in Jewish ethics. I've never seen anyone pick up hitchhikers in Texas. Thank you very much. And I said to Bob, you know, Bob, it's not just me. Around here, we all pick up hitchhikers. We have a common vision. We trust each other. And just like everyone else, I do my best to pick up every person who puts out his finger for a ride. And by the time I finished that sentence, I realized that I was lying. I was lying to Bob and Kevin, and even worse, I was lying to myself. I believed, as I said, that I pick up every person, but it's not true. The truth is, and this dawned on me like a ton of bricks at that moment, I pick up every Jew, not every person. How did I make the mistake of thinking that I pick up every person? That means either that I don't see the Palestinians or I don't see them as significant human beings. So these two pastors and this rabbi, we had a discussion about it. And I felt that I had humiliated myself to the core. I discovered in the presence of these two pastors, it was like confession. Although I'm getting my denominations mixed up, that I had discovered that I'm a bigot. And what am I going to do about that? And I decided at that moment that I'm going to find a way to fix this. And fix it means to turn the Palestinians into human beings in my eyes and in my heart. And the way I'm going to do that is by meeting them. And before I tell you about the journey that I began to embark upon, I want us all to see a clip from the first 2 years of Roots, and it'll bring us exactly where we want to be. This was from Israeli television as we're getting it up. It was a full-length documentary about the first 2 years of Roots. This is the trailer, and you'll see Ali Abawad, our founder there, and you'll see the Dignity Center before it became what it is today.
Allahu Akbar. Adonai hu Elohim. איפה השותף? איפה האח?
אתה יושב על הכלכלה שלי, אתה יושב על הבית שלי, אתה יושב על הלב שלי, אבל לא כשותף.
האם אתה מוכן להודות שהישיבה שלך פה היא ישיבה של פשע?
וממילא תגיד לי מבחינה פוליטית.
The Jewish people, that we own this land? We don't own this land. We belong to this land. The Palestinian people also belong to this land.
אנחנו האחרונים בעולם שצריך לשבת אחד עם השני. באתי לבקש לדרוש איתם אחד עלי. מפני שאת ואני סבלנו, שלא חיפשנו את זה בפנים.
It took a while. I made some connections, and I was invited to meet Palestinians. It's now the last Wednesday of January 2014. In the afternoon, I had a map in my hand where to go, and I knew when to go. I began to get up from the sofa I was sitting in my living room, and I walked to the front door. I put my hand on the doorknob and opened it up, and I put one foot over the threshold, and my wife called behind me, "Where are you going?" And I said to her, "I'm going to meet Palestinians." And that's when all hell broke loose. So she started to scream, "What do you mean meet Palestinians? They'll kill you." And I came back in and I approached my wife. I saw the terror in her eyes. She begged me not to go. But I knew that I had to do this. I walked out the front door, closed the door behind me. I remember saying to myself as I closed the door, perhaps she's right, perhaps they will kill me. My heart is pounding. I'm afraid. I didn't get in the car. The map said I could do it in a walk. It took about 25 minutes through the orchards and vineyards around my home. And then I found myself walking in the metal gate of the Palestinian farming compound that you are sitting in right now. But in those days, there was no classroom there, no Beit Midrash, no study hall, nothing except for a few trees and animals. I walked in and I saw something I'd never seen before. You might say that I saw a miracle. I saw 15 Israelis, some of them my neighbors, and 15 Palestinians doing the strangest thing. They were talking to each other. That doesn't happen where we come from. And they're in little groups. There's 2 over here and 3 over here, 4 over there. And then I saw a Palestinian woman who's standing alone. She's not talking to anyone. She's dressed in brown from head to toe. Only her face is visible, clearly an observant Muslim. I walked right up and I said, "Hello." We talked in English for about a minute. And then I said to her, "I can't believe that I'm talking to you." And for some reason, she responded, "I can't believe I'm talking to you because we don't talk to Israeli settlers." I had no idea why she doesn't talk to Israeli settlers, but in any case, the conversation continued, so it seemed to be okay. It was a very short conversation because her son walked over and this woman wanted to introduce me. So she tells me his name is Yazan and he's 17 years old. Yazan and I shake hands and we begin to talk and I see he's wearing a windbreaker. And on the windbreaker are 3 words in the English language, seeds of peace, seeds of peace. Anyone here know what seeds of peace is? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I had no idea what seeds of peace is. I looked at the jacket and it says peace. And I looked at the young man, he's a Palestinian. And I said to myself, this can't be. Why would a Palestinian wear a jacket with the word peace on it? They don't know anything about peace. They're dangerous, violent people. So I was a little bit confused. And then jokingly, I said to Yazin, "What's this seeds of peace thing?" I was pretty sure he was going to say, "I don't know. Someone gave me the jacket. What do you care?" That's not what he said at all. He said that Seeds of Peace is a summer camp in Maine, USA. And it takes Israeli kids and Palestinian kids out of the conflict zone for a summer of recreation and reconciliation. He told me the past summer he was in the camp the whole summer. He had a great time. He met Israeli kids. They're friends on Facebook. That was when kids are on Facebook. And then he said to me that he was so changed by meeting Israelis that now he wants to spend some of his life building bridges of peace between our two peoples. And I remember listening to Yazin and not knowing if I can believe what he's saying, because it contradicted everything that I thought that I knew to be true. And you could say that Yazin's mother and Yazin were the first 2 Palestinians that began the process of unsettling me. Jamal walks over, the patriarch of the family. He's a stocky guy, just a little bit taller than me. I'm a little bit intimidated by him because he's a Palestinian male. We shake hands. He asks, where are you from? I said, I'm from Alon Shvut. Where are you from, Jamal? Beit Umar. Beit Umar? I had half of a heart attack when he said those two words, Beit Umar, because I know Beit Umar. It's a Palestinian city of 23, 24, 25,000 people. It's only an 8-minute drive from where I live going south. And I've driven on the road past Beit Umar hundreds, perhaps thousands of times. At least once my car was stoned. I had my wife and kids in the car. The windshield is breaking from the back and also from the front. And the car is rocking and everyone is screaming. So I know the people in Beit Umar, they're dangerous. And I have a friend who was gunned down on that road. He was a doctor from Hadassah Hospital coming home from work late one night, and he was just shot, presumably by the people in Beit Umar, right on the bend in the road by the city. And now I'm talking to this man. It wasn't the easiest thing in the world. Jamal starts telling me some of the events of his life that led him to come to this gathering of Israelis and Palestinians. He said, Hanan, you know, there's no Jews in Beit Umar. Okay. But he said there are the Jewish soldiers who guard the entrance to the city, and we hate them because they make life miserable. They prevent us from going in and out freely. And since they're the only Jews we know and we hate them, by extension, we hate all Jews. And there's no one in Beit Umar said that would ever want to have a cup of coffee with a Jew. But he said, he has this Palestinian friend many, many years ago from the city of Jericho that invited him to a dialogue group of Israelis and Palestinians. And Jamal told me, I told my friend, I'm never, ever coming with you. That's only for the weak people and the traitors. A proud Palestinian does not go to meet the enemy. But Jamal's friend really wanted him to come. And every month he's urging him. And finally, Jamal felt he couldn't refuse, so he went along. They sat in a circle in a room in Jericho, Israelis and Palestinians. Jamal told me he didn't participate. He sat in the corner, but he listened. And at one point, Jamal said, one of the Israeli men got up from his chair and looked at me. And that was very frightening. He started to walk towards me. I was really uptight. What he's going to do to me, came right up to me and forced me to shake his hand. And then he asked me questions. I had no choice but to answer him, a very unpleasant conversation. When he finally walked away, Jamal said, I ran to the bathroom to wash the filth off my hand from touching a Jew, and I vowed never to come back to this cursed place. Jamal went home, told his wife what happened. She agreed that he made a big mistake, and what has to happen now is never go back and never tell anyone in Beit Umar that he was there. However, Jamal's friend had other plans. He said, Jamal, you had a very good time. No, I didn't. I don't know how it happened, but the next month, Jamal and his wife went back to that place in Jericho. And a second time, and a third time, a fourth time, they became part of that group, Jamal told me. And then he said, Hanan, where I thought there was only an enemy, I discovered a human being who turned out to be a partner, and that changed me. And I'm listening to Jamal, and I have the same sense I had when I was listening to his son. Can I believe what he's saying? How could it be? He's Jamal. He looks Palestinians from Beit Umar, and he's a peace activist? I was very, very challenged. He told me another story. Hanan, you know, there's lots of little kids in Beit Umar. Okay. 5 years old, 6 years old. Then Jamal said that when those kids see someone who looks like you, Hanan, they start to cry. I said, why do they start to cry? And he did not understand why I don't understand. As if it's obvious. You look at me, you start to cry. He got flustered when I said, what are you talking about? And he said, it's the kippah you have on your head and the beard and the things hang from your pants because so many people are dressed like you. They walk into Beit Umar, said, they take their submachine guns. He does like this and they kill the kids. I thought that was borderline anti-Semitic. That's a blood libel. What are you talking about? And I was about to tell him off as my rage was growing inside me. And then a light bulb went off in my mind. And I realized this is a moment of blessing. Because for the first time in my life, I'm experiencing how the other experiences me. And that could be a blessing if I am able to hold the experience and not lash out in rage. So I'm holding myself back. I don't know what I'm going to say to him. And then I have a vision. In my mind's eye, I see my two grown sons and one of my son-in-laws with their wives and with their kids taking a family walk in the fields around our home. And I notice in my vision that the three young fathers are all carrying pistols, like all the other young men where I come from. And I said to myself, those guns must be frightening to little Palestinian kids. And then I said to Jamal, well, what do you want? We carry guns because we're afraid of you. And he responded, you cannot be afraid of us because we're afraid of you. And I was very, very confused. Why are they afraid of us? We're peace-loving people. No one uses those guns. They're just for self-protection. I'm getting more and more undone and unsettled and confused and a little bit, I can't describe it actually. And later we sat in a circle that afternoon that became evening. The sun is going down and the 15 Israelis and 15 Palestinians are sitting around and listening to our host, Ali Abu Awad. Ali, you saw in the film, he's the owner of the land we were convening on. He's the Palestinian convener of the get-together. And he begins talking in perfect Hebrew that it turns out he learned for many years in Israeli jail. And Ali says, my name is Ali Abu Awad. I'm from a proud Palestinian family. For generations, we lived in Kubeba. And I said to myself, where's Kubeba? He said, in 1948, during the war, the Jews forced us out, and later the Jews turned Kubeba into Lachish. And I said to myself, I know where Lachish is. It's from my house on the way to the sea, to the Mediterranean. And he said that a good part of the clan moved from Kubeba to the West Bank, to Beit Umar. We lived there, he said, 19 years under Jordanian occupation. And then since 1967, we live under the rigors and the suffering and the injustice of the Israeli occupation. Israeli occupation, he said. That was the first time in my life I ever heard a human being use those two words in my presence. And I had no idea what he's talking about. Because I, of course, had read in the news and heard on the radio that the European Union and the United Nations always condemning the Israeli occupation. But I never had stopped to think where this could be. Because when I walk in the fields of Judea, when I drive in the roads of Samaria, I don't see occupation. I see return of the Jewish people to our ancient homeland after 2,000 years of exile. What could be more righteous than that? And suddenly I hear Ali Abu Awad saying that he lives in Palestine and he's a Palestinian. He's fighting non-violently for the liberation of his land from the Jews. And he talks about the first intifada, the first Palestinian uprising, when his mother was organizing strikes and giving out leaflets, and the Israeli soldiers, he said, came into the house in the middle of the night and beat her up more than once. And then she was taken to 6 years in jail, he said. And then he said he was thrown into Israeli jail for 10 years and not told the charges in the secret file against him. And I want to get up and say, Ali, you're a liar. That can't be. You're making it up. But I didn't get up and yell at Ali because he wasn't trying to convince us of anything. He was just telling the story of his life very, very calmly. And I went home that day trying to think about what I heard and learned, and I remember getting nauseous because the things they said, can they be true? They contradict what I know. He said he lives in Palestine, but I live in Israel. What is he talking about? And these things I heard are doing battle inside my stomach with everything I know to be true. I'm getting so nauseous, I have to bend down and pick my stomach up and put it back in. I couldn't go on. I literally couldn't go on. I had to figure this out. I went back after a few days, perhaps a week, to the first place that I met Ali and Jamal and the others. Ali was there with his donkey. We started to talk. Jamal came. Other Israelis joined us. At the beginning was 3 from this side and 3 from that side, and then 5 and 5 and 10 and 10 and 15 and 15. And once a week, until the wee hours of the night, for weeks that became months, that became years, we talked. And what we actually did, in one word, is stories. The Palestinians told us the stories of who they are. History, aspirations, suffering. It was very hard to listen to the Palestinian stories because the Palestinian stories contradict the Jewish stories. And then we Jews told the Palestinians our stories of 3,000 years of peoplehood, 2,000 years of exile, of coming home to the land of Israel through the Zionist movement. It was very hard for the Palestinians to listen to the Jewish stories because the Jewish stories contradict the Palestinian stories. It was very hard to listen. but we listened until it hurt, and we listened some more. Almost all the time when you listen to other stories that are so foreign to you and contradict everything you know, you feel like you're a traitor for listening. And you feel like sometimes you want to get up and tell them you're wrong, it can't be. And other times you feel you want to run away and not come back. But by and large, we didn't run away and we didn't yell and scream. We listened until it hurt and we listened some more. And I want to make it very clear that what I'm talking about is by and large not dialogue. It's not that one side listens, it's not that one side speaks, the other side listens and responds. It's not about responses. It's not about poking holes in the other side's argument. It's not about debating. It's about listening and then going home and stewing over it and trying to figure out how this could be. Is there a way that what they said could fit in my image of reality? And then I come back the next week and I get to tell my stories and they listen until it hurts and try and figure out what it means for them. At this point, I want to try and summarize a little bit of what we've learned through 10 years of non-dialogue. So first of all, Ali Abouad, almost from the outset, said to us, it's true. What you Israeli Jews think about the Palestinians is true. Yes, most of the Palestinians go to sleep at night dreaming that the Israeli Jews will disappear from this land tomorrow. Ali said, I've gotten over that dream, but most Palestinians are certain that the Jews don't belong. And if we Palestinians hold on long enough and fight strongly enough, eventually the Jews will leave. Just like the Algerians threw the French colonialists out of Algeria. So we Palestinians will throw the Jewish colonialists out of this land. It's ours and not theirs. It was very hard for us Jews to hear Ali say that. But you know what? We Jews had to admit that we go to sleep at night with the same dreams that the Palestinians will disappear tomorrow because we Jews know they don't belong. We'll hold on enough years, 5 years, 50 years, 100 years. They'll get the message, it's our land, not theirs, and they'll go. But Ali told us, as well as the other Palestinians, that we Palestinians have no other place to go. And we Israeli Jews told the Palestinians that we have no other place to go. Now, what happens when you hear the other side's stories again and again, stories of belonging to the land, of history in the land, of aspirations in the land? You begin to realize that you've been living your whole life in a fantasy. We have been living our lives as Jews that eventually the Palestinians will not be here, will be here alone. And the Palestinians have this fantasy that eventually they'll be here alone without the Jews, but it's not going to be. And it fries your brain. You have to reconfigure everything you know of the past, the present, and the future because you suddenly realize it's all been an illusion. And the future is with the two sides together in that land, whether we like it or not. There's no other future. Well, another thing we learned is that most Israeli Jews and most Palestinians construct their identities upon the erasure of the other side's identity. Both sides think they can tell the other side who they are. You know what the Palestinians say about the Israelis? They say, Jew, very nice. The Quran greatly respects Judaism, but it's a faith, it's a religion, it's not a people, not a nation. You don't need land, so go back to Russia where you came from. And the Jews, they say to the Palestinians, Palestinian, you know there's no such thing. Never was a Palestinian state. It's a made-up identity, so go back to Saudi Arabia where you came from. Why did you come to take our land? But after you listen to the other side again and again and again, you realize you know nothing about who they are. You can't tell them who they are. You have to listen while they tell who they are, and then they may listen when you tell who you are. Here are 3 conclusions we came to. Number 1, there is such a thing as the Palestinian people. Corollary of number 1, there is such a thing as the Jewish people. Number 2, there is such a thing as the land of Palestine. Number 2, perhaps you guessed it, there's such a thing, corollary of number 2, there's such a thing as the land of Israel. Number 3, the Palestinians are deeply connected to the land of Palestine. And corollary of number 3, the Jews are deeply connected to the land of Israel. And now comes the most excruciatingly difficult conclusion of all. The boundaries, the borders of the historical land of Palestine and the boundaries, the borders of the historical land of Israel are the exact same borders and boundaries. From the river to the sea, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, Palestine will be free. It's all historical Palestine. And from the exact same Jordan River to the exact same Mediterranean Sea is all historical Israel. The Holy Land has given birth to two siblings who both have an equal inheritance in Mother Earth. And it's excruciatingly difficult for Israelis and Palestinians to admit that, because it means giving up on the hubris of exclusivity. It does not mean giving up on your identity, but it means expanding your identity to include the truth of the other side. I'm an Israeli, I'm a Jew, I'm a Zionist, I'm deeply connected to the whole land, but I have to expand myself to include room in my heart for the other side. The land also is Palestine. I want to tell you the way Ali Abu Awad succinctly sums up what you just heard me say. Ali says, we have to find a way to fit two truths into one heart. Two truths into one heart is the only way to fit two peoples into one land. And I want to say the same thing in different language. You don't have to be wrong for me to be right. So many people, Israelis and Palestinians, and also so many people in America, in the US, Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, blacks and whites, Jews, Christians and Muslims, try to prove again and again that the other side is wrong because of the belief that if they are right, then I am wrong, so they better be wrong. But it's not a zero-sum game. You don't have to be wrong for me to be right. You can be right and I can be right. But that's very, very difficult to understand and to accept. I'm going to sum up with 3 points. Number one, the work of Roots, the Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation, is exclusively in the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria. We do not work within the state of Israel proper. There are many other wonderful grassroots peace organizations that do the work within Israel proper, between Israeli Jews living in Israel proper and Palestinians. Roots has devoted itself to working with the Jews in the West Bank and the Palestinians in the West Bank. Now you have to understand, the Jews in the West Bank, many of them see themselves as the enemies of peace, and Israeli peaceniks see the settlers as enemies of peace. So most peace organizations say the settlers are enemies of peace, we can't talk to them. And Roots says, if the settlers are the enemies of peace, we have to talk to them. We do our work specifically there in the heart of the conflict, because the heart of the conflict has to be the heart of the solution. There's no other way. We have our center, the Dignity Center that I've been talking about, between Bethlehem and Hebron, south of Jerusalem. North of Jerusalem, we have another local association of Israelis and Palestinians to the south of Nablus, Shechem, and in the Jordan Valley. We have a third local association of Israelis and Palestinians. We also have activists, Israelis and Palestinians, throughout the West Bank. That's the heart of the problem. Number two, religion. Religion is part of the problem. That means that Judaism, my Judaism, is part of the problem. And Islam as well is part of the problem. There are many, many interpretations in Judaism that have gained ascendancy and become mainstream in these days that are fueling the conflict. And the same thing in Islam. Most peace organizations have said in the past and continue to say, if religion is part of the problem, then let's ignore it, because you can't talk to those religious people. And Roots says if religion is part of the problem, religion has to be part of the solution. That's again why we're in the West Bank, where the most devout Israeli Orthodox Jews live. They have to become part of the solution. And I want to make it clear, we do a lot of interfaith dialogue. That's what it's about, coming to the issues that fuel this conflict. And we don't focus our energy in interfaith dialogue on the text that we have in common. We don't talk about the nice things like love your neighbor as yourself. We talk about the hard text, the text on my side and the text on the other side that are making this conflict worse. And we find ways to reinterpret and re-understand and reapply in order to further the work of reconciliation. Third point and last point, settlements. You heard me say that Roots recognizes that the whole land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea is Palestine. And you heard me see that that same whole land is also Israel, historical Palestine. And what that means is that both sides, Israelis and Palestinians, should have the right and the privilege to live in the whole land. That means that Jews should have the right to live in the whole land, even in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, but not at the expense of the Palestinian people. And as far as I'm concerned, the way that my people, the Jewish Israeli people and the settlement movement have been living in the West Bank for the past decades is absolutely at the expense of the Palestinian free rights, at the expense of Palestinian freedom, Palestinian dignity, Palestinian access to land and to resources, water. That is wrong. That has to change. And the work of Roots in coming to understand and appreciate the other side's connection to the land is part of the solution. There's another word for the way my people is behaving towards the Palestinian people, and that word is occupation. The Palestinian people live under my people's occupation, without rights, without freedom, without dignity, and that is wrong. And that is extremely problematic. It's evil, it's bad, all the words that you want, it has to end. And we again in Roots believe that through our people-to-people work of creating recognition for the other side's identity and belonging to the land, we are establishing the human groundwork for a future political peace settlement of dignity, of equality, of freedom, human rights, and security for both sides in that little sliver of land that we both call home. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Hi. I hope that you still have some energy to go on another journey, but I promise it will not be as long. I can't believe you did this in the morning only in 20 minutes. We did the same thing, same presentation in 20 minutes. Okay, so my name is Noor Awad. I live in Bethlehem, and I was born in Jordan. I'm going to tell you my story and how actually I grew up and how I came to join Roots and what we are thinking we are trying to accomplish. So my name is Noor Awad. I live in Bethlehem, and I said I was born in Jordan. Now, the reason why I was born in Jordan is that we have to go back to 1948. In 1948, my family are originally from Jerusalem. South of Jerusalem, there was a small village called Malha. Long story short, 1948 war, before it actually started, a month before that, a neighboring village of ours actually called Deir Yassin was attacked by the Jewish side. The brutal massacre takes place there. The people are killed. The news comes to my village. The people are afraid that we are going to be attacked next. I mean, my grandparents and my family. And so the people in my village, they start to run away to a refugee camp in the area of Bethlehem, just outside of Bethlehem, that the United Nations have just established. That's in May 1948. Some of my people stayed in their village. They hope that this will be, that they can save the village, they can stay in their homes. But by July 1948, it became impossible to stay in the village. The Haganah came and they attacked the village and they conquered it. Now, all of my family are in the refugee camp. All of my grandparents are in the refugee camp. And I know from them that they were hoping that this will be for a short time, maybe a few weeks, few months. The war will stop at some point, and then they will be able to go back to their homes. The war lasts for another 1.5 years, and by the end of 1949, my grandparents realized they will not be allowed to go back to their village because their village that became part of West Jerusalem is now part of the state of Israel, where no Palestinian refugee is allowed to go back. And where they are staying in the refugee camp in Bethlehem, that became part of Jordan or under Jordanian occupation. My parents were born in Bethlehem. They grew up during the Jordanian time, and after 1967, they grew up under the Israeli occupation. And at some point, my father, he lost hope that he can ever have a normal life in our country, in our homeland. So that's why my father started to plan to leave. His plan was to go to Europe, but he did not make it all the way to Europe. He just went to Jordan, to Amman. My mother also went to Jordan as well, and they got married there. So that's why I was born there. In 1995, something different happened this story. In 1995, we were in the middle of the Oslo peace process. And for the first time, after several decades of fights and wars and conflict, the Israeli leadership and the Palestinian leadership now are talking about putting an end to the occupation. And soon there will be a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. That was a very hopeful news to my family. That brought a lot of hope. It didn't say anything about my grandparents' home in Malha in Jerusalem yet, but to end the occupation in the West Bank, that was a big news. And based on that hope that my parents had, they say this is the time for us now to return back, to go back, on the hopes that we are going to live our normal life in Bethlehem and not under occupation. So this is when my family moved back, or my parents moved back. I was only 4 years old, and I don't remember a lot actually, but I have few memories that I would like to share with you. I'm talking about the time between 1995 and 2000. In those 5 years, I remember that when we lived in Bethlehem, my father actually, he used to work in Jerusalem, and he used to go to drive every day from Jerusalem, from Bethlehem to Jerusalem to his work. It's not that, actually, it's not a long drive. It's only 20 minutes. It's really so close. But that's something that no one is able to do almost in the West Bank today. To travel from the West Bank as a Palestinian on your car to Jerusalem or to Israel proper, you cannot do that. But I remember doing this. I remember actually when my father used to take us to pray on Friday. So I come from a Muslim background, and we used to go to Al-Aqsa to pray in Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, in Temple Mount in the old city. And also I remember us going as a family to the beach when we wanted to go to Jaffa and we wanted to go to Akka. Now, I'm not saying to you that in those 5 years, between 1995 and 2000, peace has prevailed and the conflict just ended, the occupation faded away. That's not what happened, of course. There was, of course, violence and tension, but I maybe was too young to understand and to hold the complexity of the situation around me. But I remember growing up, and in the year 2000, the peace process that was supposed to bring us to an end of the occupation and Palestinian statehood, it did not. It failed miserably. And you can say it even left us with more complicated situation on the ground now, because we still have the Israeli army in the West Bank, and now we have Palestinian Authority. We still have the settlements, and the West Bank area is divided to A, B, and C. And so it's more complicated situation on the ground. And that left so many people on the ground with a lot of frustration. That frustration would become the second uprising, the second Palestinian intifada against the Israeli occupation. So the next 5 and 7 years of my life are what considered to be one of the violent chapters of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And all of a sudden, I'm in Bethlehem, and the city becomes or turns into a war zone. By 2002, F-16 was bombing Bethlehem. Tens of tanks literally besieged the city for more than a month. The Israeli army came to assassinate Palestinian leaders and militant groups. That's the time when the bomb suiciding attacks were happening in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, inside Israel. My father was still able to go to his work, but it was a very dangerous situation. And that's the reality I'm growing up with. And even remember at some point that the house we lived in Beit Sahor, that's northeast of Bethlehem, there was actually every night, there was firing, there was shooting between both sides. The Israeli army on the other side of the valley, there is a settlement that Israel built, and there is an Israeli military base. And on our side, there is a Palestinian, also kind of like military base. There is for Palestinian security forces, and the Israeli security forces and Israeli army will shoot at each other, and the people who are living in that valley are basically stuck in the middle of this crossfire. So this is just a little bit about how the reality turned into very violent one quickly. And as a teenager, I was thinking about all of this, what's happening around me. And I thought about it, and I felt so angry. And you can say I felt also very unlucky, because I said to myself, because of who I am, the identity I was born with. And where I live, I have to endure all of this. I have to go through this situation. And it seemed to me that in the bigger story, because it's not only my story, in the bigger story, I'm just writing the next chapter of a long story of ongoing suffering. It started with my grandparents who lost their home and everything they had in 1948 and became refugees, and my parents who were born as refugees and lived from one occupation to another. And it seemed very much that this is actually what my life is going to be. And I didn't want that. At that age of 14, 15 years old, actually, I'm thinking about the situation and I say to myself that this can't be. I couldn't have to live my life this way. But what can I do about it? And it seemed that there is nothing really I can do to change the situation. It's way bigger than me. It's way bigger that I, as one person, can really affect it. And probably the wisest idea, or if I want to think smart for my life and for my future, I should just get out of there, run away, go somewhere else, start a new life and detach myself from my homeland, from my country and what's happening there in Palestine, and just move on and build yourself a new life somewhere else. That's what I wanted to do. But that was not the only idea in my head, because at the same time, I have to go back to the question of what can I do? I'm not easily satisfied that there is nothing I can do. Because when I ask this question, you have to understand something, that I can sit and blame many sides for the situation. For example, I can blame the enemy side, what they did to us, what they are doing to us, the Israelis. I can also blame my side. I can blame the older generation. I would say it's the past generation fault. It's their fault. It's not mine. It's the leadership fault. But at the end of the day, no matter who I'm blaming, I do understand that this is the situation that we were born into and we have to deal with. It's not perfect, but we have to do something about it. And when I use the word we, I'm clearly talking about my generation. So it's not just about me, and it's about my people, but specifically about this generation, my generation. Now, what do I want to do about the situation? If you are a Palestinian living in the West Bank, growing up there, or in East Jerusalem, part of the West Bank, or at some point even in Gaza, it doesn't take you a long time to understand that the number one reason that makes our life complicated, that takes away our national political right of occupation. I mean that in every level of your life. It intervenes in every aspect of your life. You cannot live there planning for your life and your future without hitting the wall of the occupation on so many think about on a personal level, on a collective level. So it becomes clear to any Palestinian in this situation that this must end. And this is not a unique situation only for us. I mean, there are other nations, many, or they are still living, and what they did usually, they fought for their resistance. They struggled to get liberation, and that's what we need to do. But what does that mean? How do I translate it on the ground? It means that I, Noor, and with my friends and my neighbors and everybody in my community, we need to be standing up and resisting this occupation, and that includes violence and non-violence and any effective way that can bring the occupation to an end. And I mean it. This is not just some theoretical debate I'm having it with myself at the age of 15, 16 years old. That's the reality around me. People are killed. People go to jail. And many people try to live their life despite the occupation. Now, that's my background. This is my story. That's the reality I grew up with, and you can even say that's the challenge that I grew up with, and I'm talking about here tonight. I want to move with you fast forward, because I promised this will be a short one. So fast forward 10 years after that. We are now at the year 2016, and I'm hired to guide a group of American students. Why I'm hired to do so? Because I'm a tour guide. That's my profession. When I'm back home, I work as a tour guide since 2014, and I guide English-speaking tourists. I don't know if you know, but living in Bethlehem gave me the privilege to meet international people all the time. There are many tourists who come to our region. Most of the time are Christian pilgrims who are coming to visit the Holy Land. And you can say after visiting Jerusalem, the most important place on the list after is Bethlehem. So they come to Bethlehem, and from those many groups of tourists, I will meet a journalist here, someone who's curious. And in so many times, those tourists, those visitors, those internationals have met someone on the Israeli side. They landed in Israel. They had their guide there. They met someone and they talked about the situation and the conflict, and they hear the Israeli perspective. And they didn't meet a Palestinian and hear the Palestinian side of the story. So I find myself there actually talking from a young age, talking with international people about the situation in my country, in my homeland. And then in 2016, as I was just telling you, I was guiding a group, and I start to focus on what we call it back home, geopolitical tours. Those geopolitical tours actually are meant to educate people around the occupation and what happens in the West Bank on a daily basis. So I take this group. Now we are on the bus. We are about to leave Bethlehem in the morning, and their tour, our tour, is in Hebron, south of the West Bank. It's about an hour away drive. And I'm taking them from Bethlehem all the way to Hebron to talk about the situation there. And also on the way, I will show them some things and talk about the situation. Now, we finished Area A. That means the city of Bethlehem. We are driving out of Area A, and we are driving in Area C of the West Bank. And that's where you see all of the checkpoints and the settlements that are being built and how that affects the city of Bethlehem. That's what I talked about. New facts on the ground, two-state solution, what's happening with that. And the group is asking questions. I'm talking about this place, that village, this settlement. We get to Hebron. And in Hebron, I take them in the old city. And I talk more about the situation. And I talk about the history, about the present. And at some point, of course, we have lunch. But that lunch is not at a restaurant. It's one of the families, one of the local families there. They invite us for this lunch, invite the group. We organized it already. And after the lunch, one of the family members comes to talk to us about their life in Hebron, about Israeli soldiers coming in every night, searching their home for reason and for no reason, going up to the rooftop, about settlers attacking. So by the end of the day, you can say now that my group have a little bit better knowledge of what is the situation and what does it mean for Palestinians to live under occupation and how that experience is. Before we leave Hebron and go back to Bethlehem that day, we still have one more meeting to do. And that meeting was with an Israeli settler. For logistical reasons, the group wanted to meet an Israeli settler because they wanted to hear different perspectives on both sides. So one of those voices they wanted to hear too is an Israeli settler voice. But it never happened on my tours. And I had been a guide before that for 2 years, that I was asked to take my groups to meet with Israelis. As I told you, I work in the West Bank area, so I don't guide groups on the other side of the Green Line and not in Jerusalem. So I never had this chance to take them to meet with an Israeli. And they have met already Israelis on in the first part of their tour, let alone Israeli settler. So I thought about it just for before the tour, and I said, it's okay, it's fine. I can take them if this is what the group wants. I showed them the situation. We toured around and we saw many things. But now I start to think, how can we do it? Because I will not be allowed to enter the settlement where the speaker will meet the group. So I thought that the most practical way of doing it will be actually me bringing the group to the checkpoint at the entrance of the settlement. And then I will have to hand the group over to the settler, to the speaker. The group actually have their meeting inside. I will wait outside somewhere. And then after an hour and a half, the group comes back because we need to travel back to Bethlehem. And then I talked to the speaker, and he said to me that actually I should join and I should listen to the things that he will say. And I said yes. And now me and him and the group are looking for a place where an Israeli and Palestinian can all sit together actually in the old city of Hebron. And there's no such place like this. Finally, he suggested we go to the tomb of the patriarchs, to the Ibrahimi mosque, to that holy site, and that we sit on the Jewish side because this is where he's allowed to sit. Now, I thought about it and I said, but wait, I cannot go on the Jewish side because that place, there is a checkpoint. And the holy site is under the Israeli military control as well, like most of the West Bank. So on the Muslim side, Palestinians are allowed and Israelis are not allowed. And on the Jewish side, Israelis are allowed and Palestinians not allowed. So how we will do it? He said, don't worry. I know the soldiers at the checkpoint down. I will walk in front of the group. You just walk in the middle, they will not see you, and we will cross this way. So I trusted him, and I wanted to take this adventure to go on the other side for the first time and the only time, by the way. So actually we did it. I walked, the soldiers did not see me, and that was my first time on the Jewish side of the Tomb of the Patriarchs and the only time. Now we are sitting there, and he is actually talking to the group. He's talking to us, and he's doing very much similar to what me and Rabbi Hanan did tonight. He's talking about his story. And he began by introducing himself and telling us that he was born here in the US. And he grew up as an American Jewish citizen with a very, very good life. But then he decided to give up on his life and move all the way across the Atlantic to Palestine, because that's where his ancestral homeland is. And that's where he needs to live as a Jewish person to fulfill his Jewish identity. I'm the only Palestinian among the students, the American students, and I understand, of course, he's talking from the Zionist perspective. He thinks really that this is his land and he should live here. And in my mind, I'm listening to this person, I'm looking at him as an American person. Doesn't matter what's his faith, what's his religion, a Christian or Jewish or not, doesn't matter to me. But this American person really believes that my land is his land, and he left his country to come on to my country, to my land, and live there. And he's not talking about the state of Israel, he's talking about the West Bank even, and talking about living in the heart of the West Bank. And then I continue to listen. And then he said two things, two major beliefs that actually, you can say that his story and his identity stands on those two beliefs, the way how he explained it to us. The first thing he said, there is no occupation. It can't be, because the return of my people, the Jewish people, to our ancestral homeland cannot be considered occupation in any way, in any sense, cannot be considered illegal. And I was like, what? I didn't say anything, but in my mind, I couldn't really listen to this nonsense that he's talking about. What do you mean there's no occupation? This is not about your perspective or my perspective. This is a legal fact, a political fact. We live under Israeli army control. They control the West Bank. They control the borders, airspace, everything. How can you say, I'm not an Israeli citizen. I cannot become an Israeli citizen even under the occupation. So how can you say there's no occupation? I did not understand. I couldn't process at any level, you can say, what he just said. Couldn't understand, seriously. And then the second thing he said, and that was a little bit less shocking to me, he said there is no Palestinian people. There is no Palestinians. They are just Arabs here. And the Arabs have 22 countries. And they are all around. The Arabs can go and live wherever they want. They have 22 countries. We have only one country. And I wasn't shocked with this because I grew up always as a Palestinian learning that this is how the other side talked about us. They denied our mere existence from the beginning of this conflict. The Zionist movement was telling the Jews in Europe in the 19th century, a land without people for a people without land. The Jews are in diaspora and exile for 2,000 years and the land is empty, no one lives there. But that's not true. That was a myth. But I understood because of course he will think this way, of course he will say this way, but now the group is confused. Because if there are no Palestinians and if there is no occupation, then why there is a conflict? And then he talks about that. He talks about many other things that happened. And I let the group ask their questions. We finished that talk. He said something that was happening at the time. I thought it was inaccurate. I had to interject to say something. I said something. We end up arguing. And even that argument didn't make any sense. And then I took the group and we left Hebron. Now we are on our way back to Bethlehem. And I'm just thinking about this meeting, this encounter with the Israeli settler. And the more I think about it, and the more I remember his words, the stronger the feeling of denial that I feel inside of me. I felt that by listening to him, everything that makes who I am, the ground that I stand on, is being denied. I mean, without pride about it, the situation that I live under, the occupation, have in a way to do with defining me, defining my life, the circumstances I live under. My identity is also being denied by him. So I was really seriously thinking about it, about the things that he said and he believed in, and I felt like there is a lot of denial. I felt at some point as if I don't exist. And I was thinking more about it, and it hit me at a moment while I'm on the bus with the group that this Israeli settler was the first Israeli that I ever talked to in my life. How could that be? Someone can ask. I mean, you live there. Of course, you had the chance to meet Israelis before. I will say that I just realized 8 years ago in 2016 that all of the Israelis that I have met with and I have dealt with were Israeli soldiers when they stop us at the checkpoints, when they come to Bethlehem to conduct arrests, when they search our cars and when they take our IDs and when they arrest us. That's how I dealt with the Israelis. I never thought about it. I mean, I was imagining, you can say, that everyone on the other side is the soldiers. There is no one else. And I understood, of course, that we are meeting with a settler and he's going to bring this radical perspective from the other side. And that's not mostly how all people on the other side are thinking, but the level of denial was so powerful back then that I said to myself, I met with the first Israeli and the last one. I don't want and I don't need to meet with anyone from the enemy anymore. Now, I didn't know that I'm meeting Rabbi Hanan on the same day. I'm going back to Bethlehem, I think. Actually, turns out that we still have one last stop to do, and that was at Roots, Shorashim, Judur, the same organization that I'm part of today. It wasn't so clear. I read the name of the speaker, Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger from Elon-Shvut. I thought we are meeting with another settler. He's from the Gush Etzion area, halfway between Bethlehem and Hebron. I actually start to wonder why we have this second meeting. I take my phone out. I call Saeed, one of the people who work with me. I call him Saeed. Just like really explain it to me. I don't understand what's the purpose of the second meeting. And then he say there's a project and it's called Roots. And then I ask what they are doing. And he said there are Israelis and Palestinians there and the Israeli settlers. And I ask, okay, so what they are doing? And he said they talk about peace. They talk about peace. That sounded like the most ridiculous and the most dangerous and the most suspicious thing that I can hear in my reality, in my context. What do you mean? There are Palestinians. Maybe I know one of them. Some of them might be my neighbors who are sitting with Israeli settlers talking about peace. That did not sound positive in any level, in any direction. And I wanted now to go there, not just to bring the group and not to meet with the Israelis, but to meet with those Palestinians and in some sense to tell them off, to really like, what are you doing? And then I take the group. We go to the place, Merkaz Karama, that Rabbi Hanan mentioned in the very beginning of his presentation. It's a Palestinian farmland in Area C, close to the main road. We enter there. And Ali Abu Awad, who you saw in the video, wasn't actually there. It was only Rabbi Hanan. And we sat with Rabbi Hanan. He introduced himself and he shared with us the same story that he shared with you. He did it in 45 minutes, I remember. Like, I was looking at the watch and I was like, as a guide, like really counting the time. And then he talked. I cannot deny that at the beginning when I was listening to him, it was very difficult for me to sit. It was very difficult for me even to listen. He's talking about all of being a Zionist and being a settler and about all of the 2,000 years of history and 3,000 years and all of that. And I'm thinking to myself, here there's another American who have that privilege to leave his country and come to my land and say that this is his land, this is his ancestral homeland, and he lives here now as a settler. And I, at some point, said to myself, what you are still doing here? You don't need to hear this. I mean, take a break. It's the end of the day. I'm already tired. And you know what? We have a bus driver with us because we have a bus. So the bus driver is outside sitting alone. So I said, better I should actually just stand up and leave the room and go sit with the bus driver. But I didn't do that for a number of reasons. But one of the most important reasons that I thought about is that I was telling myself, even though I didn't really like what I listened, I want to listen. Maybe he will say something about the reality. Maybe he will say something that has a truth in it of what's happening. Until he started to talk about my side, I wasn't able to hear truth in his words. And then Rabbi Hanan challenged me and he challenged the rest of the group. When he started to tell us about the stories that he realized, when he realized that there is another side here, that there is another people, that the land have another name, that there are other people who live under different circumstances that I do. And then he tell us one story after the another with meeting Ali and Jamal and their families and how that affected him, deeply affected him. And yet at the end, he's still actually who he is with his identity and his connection, but able to see my people and our identity and our connection. I can tell you again that the group was confused. Those American kids were having a hard time that day. This is not how they expected a settler to speak. And I know they were confused because on the bus they asked me, what do you think? Like, what do you think about this meeting? What do you think about this guy, this organization? And I didn't really have an answer at the beginning, but I thought about it. And the more I thought about it, going back to Bethlehem on the bus, it's a short drive, half an hour. I was thinking about what just happened and this encounter we had. And I felt, unlike the denial that I received by meeting with the first settler, after meeting with Rabbi Hanan, I felt two things strongly. One is recognition. There is recognition in his words, a recognition of my side and his side of the two stories. And two, there is a level of empathy. He took a further step and not only recognized that there is another people exist on this land, but he's able to empathize with us, understand our story, we will come from. And that's for sure very rare. Enemies do not empathize with each other. But when one side start to do it, or one person on the other side do it, it is so powerful. I continued to think about it, and I could not just get it out of my head. You know, it could be easy for me at that day to say, okay, you met someone nice from the other side, but seriously, how many people are like him on his side? I'm sure that most people are like the first settler I met with. And just to tell myself, there is no reason for me to change my mind at all. But I didn't think about it this way, because what I was thinking at that moment, I felt that I found someone on the other side who can listen and be a partner. And that was so powerful and so exciting that I wanted to meet with him again. Now, Rabbi Hanan did something good. We exchanged phone numbers. He took my phone number. He called me a few days after. And then we met close to Bethlehem where I live. He came, not to the city, but still in Area C. We met again and I listened to him and I went back to Roots. And after I went back to Roots, actually, I listened more to what Ali is saying, what Rabbi Hanan is saying. Rabbi Hanan said that day when he met my group, a very powerful thing about the meaning of truth. And he said it, I think, in the beginning of his presentation tonight, about when one side thinks the truth is only on their side, that's when this person is actually close to falsehood. And that resonated a lot with me. For some reason, I was thinking about it. Because when I met with Rabbi Hanan, it was the first time you can say that I heard someone from the other side telling their story, not by denying my story. I went back to Roots and I joined. I joined after a few days, few weeks of participating and listening, and mostly listening more than talking, because of many reasons. And I want to share with you some of these reasons. In the middle of my story, I talked about what does it mean to take responsibility and the challenge that we face every single day in Palestine, about us trying to get to freedom, trying to get to national liberation, trying to have our own country and not to suffer under the occupation. Never in my life I thought that there could be partners on the other side. But now I found partners, actually. And never in my life I thought that in my vision for liberation, that I did not thought about the other side. It was only about my people. It was only about us. Like Rabbi Hanan also said, it's, in some sense, we were thinking about one day we will be here without them. And that's when we will be free. But that's not true. We have to live together. We are doomed to live together. Either we are living together and killing each other, or find a way to actually live together in dignity and in security and in freedom for both sides. One of the things that I also learned and I took with me from this work in those 8 years is that I thought for all of my life that the victims of occupation are the ones who are occupied. The victims of the oppression are the ones who are under the oppression. But I learned that you can say, actually, the victims of the occupation are the occupiers themselves. They are not free from that. They are not a normal society, as we are. Rabbi Hanan said at the beginning of his story, both people are sick, and that's true. We are both sick because of this conflict, because of the occupation, because of the reality that we are living in, because of the way how we both constructed our identities on the denial of the other identity, on this exclusivism of that the truth only was on my side. I joined Roots because I also thought that this is a way, as I said, of taking responsibility, of moving things forward, and actually for us to try to create a better future for both people on the land. So that's my story. That's the experience that I have went, or some of the experience that I have went through so far. Thank you for listening, and I'm sure, like, I'm looking forward to your questions and the answers, and so thank you. I think we will show the video now. We will show you the second video, actually, from our work. That's from about 5 years ago. You will see in this video some of the work and the programs that we are doing in the center, in Markaz Karama, what actually happens there. But this video is actually a little bit old, like the organization have grown more than what you see in the video.
مرحبا، اسمي خالد أبو عواد من قرية بيت أمار فلسطين.
Shalom. אני הדסה פרומן, מתקוע, אשתו של הרב מנחם פרומן, זיכרונו לברכה. My name is Nadine, I am from Bethlehem.
Shalom, my name is Shaul. I live in Tekoa.
Hi, I'm Bilal. I'm from Pitzoma.
My name is Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger, and I live in Alon Shvut.
4 years ago, here in our family land, Roots start. Roots is a partnership between people from both sides, people who believe in nonviolence, dignity, and quality between our people. Dignity for me is when you respect the other one, when you give him the space for his life, when you respect his opinion, his culture. This is the dignity. And it's very important for us, the Middle East people. We try here to give another picture to the people in order to increase the hope inside them.
We work in many different directions, but one of the core things that happens here is the people-to-people work.
Three years ago.
Cannot happen without friendship, without love for each other, and to have fun together.
All my life, before I come to youth group, I only went once to Israel or to beach. It was very emotional to go with each other because I never imagined that I would go to beach with an Israelis, you know.
All of these programs engage with our local communities, bringing people who are a little bit afraid to come and came for the first time and then saw something that surprised them and became involved.
אנחנו פה עומדים כולנו בכאב גדול, והשאלה איך גורמים לזה שזה לא יהיה עוד פעם ולא נעמוד פה באותו בכי.
It was so important when Roots went to Etzion Junction, you know, to protest against the violence in Douma. And both Palestinians and Israelis should condemn violence and should stand with each other against violence and should show the people, the world, and also the extremists on both sides that there are Palestinians who are against violence and they are protesting and they are saying no violence in my name, and also Israelis who are saying the same thing.
We expand our circles in many ways. I travel and speak all over Israel, in the radio, in the television, and a lot of meeting with young people. People are thirsty to hear what we are doing. They don't believe the dream of peace can become real.
Roots Network today includes representatives from 28 different Israeli and Palestinian towns in this area, this local area.
Roots has created a miracle, an expanding island of sanity, a veritable Garden of Eden in a land full with so much ignorance of the other, prejudice, stereotypes, and fear. We are beginning to bring a little bit of healing, deep recognition of the others belonging to this land, preparing the ground for a future of coexistence, human rights, dignity, and mutual recognition. We need your help. We ask you to join us and join the thousands of people around the globe who are supporting Roots. Instead of exporting the Palestinian-Israeli conflict to the four corners of the globe, help us to export recognition and respect. Thank you very much. Immediately, we'll begin questions or perhaps some answers. But before that, anyone who's interested in signing up for our monthly newsletter, which is really only once a month, we won't fill up your inbox. We send this out by email. You can sign up either by taking a picture of the QR code, or that's up on the screen, or I'm passing around 3 clipboards that have both the QR code on them and also have the option of writing your name manually and the email. So that's going around.
How do people come to get involved in Roots? Is it by invitation, coincidence? What draws people into the movement?
There are different ways that people actually come to our work. First of all, there is no a membership, like people come to become like officially part of Roots. There are several programs, and when we have these programs, we try to recruit people for them. It's sometimes different on both sides. Usually on the Palestinian side, it's by the word of mouth. Friends know it, like friends bring their friends, families most of the time actually happens. There's like big families, clans who actually bring like a lot of their relatives and cousins. And that's how it happens on the Palestinian side. In my case, it was like a coincidence. I wasn't planning to go there. I found myself there and I joined. So sometimes we do invite people, and I do try to invite my friends and other people from Roots, other people to come to Roots.
On the Israeli side, it's also, as Noor said, by word of mouth and by friends and families. Parents whose children have been in the summer camp, the parents may come, or the opposite, women who've been in the photography workshops with Saskia, they'll send their kids to the summer camp. Among the Israelis, we also do some publicity publicly on the email lists of the different settlements in the area where we do our work. And perhaps I'll add that it's not the easiest thing to bring people to our work because we're swimming against the current. The things we're doing and the principles we are espousing are not what most people, Israelis and Palestinians, believe in. On the Israeli side, I'll tell you that it's pretty difficult for people to come to meet Palestinians because it sounds like it's a political statement. Many Israelis really don't believe that there are such things as Palestinians. And therefore, it's much easier to bring Israelis when you don't frame it as meeting Palestinians, but rather when you frame it as meeting Muslims. And it's the same thing. But it sounds different, and it is taken not as something political, but something just expanding your religious horizons, getting to know the other. And indeed, our interfaith dialogue and our interfaith celebrations, for example, the Ramadan dinners during the month of Ramadan, which is coming up, I think, next week, Muslims around the world, including Palestinians, many of them fast from dawn to dusk and break their fast when the sun goes down. So we in Roots, once a month during Ramadan, that means for 4 times, we have these interfaith breakfast dinners, the iftar, and we get, once we had 140 people, other times 100 people, many Jews are willing to come to meet Muslims, but not necessarily to meet Palestinians.
Do you feel that your lives and livelihoods and relationships with your peoples of origin are at risk because of your work?
Yeah, of course, that's part of the challenge that we face. I never felt like my life is at risk, but definitely when I joined the work of Roots and I started to tell the people around me, at the beginning, you can say I didn't have the level of, I will call it sensitivity and awareness to like really how would I reach out to people in my community, because there is the issue of framing that Hanan talked about. It's very triggering if I tell someone from my community, come to meet a settler. The terminology, the word settler is not, it does not hold anything positive in it. It always brings something negative. So if I say this to someone on my side, it's the wrong way to try to actually invite a person or reach out. In the beginning of the work, I lost some friends, some of the people who knew what I'm doing, and they completely disagreed with me. And they, of course, understood it their way. They understood that I'm doing something bad, and they wanted to cut their ties and any relationship with me. And I gained many new friends as well. And when I tried to invite people around me, some people it didn't feel like I needed so much effort to convince them. They were kind of like convinced already that we should actually talk to the other side, meet the other side. But there's a lot of suspicion and fear at the same time that they have to deal with. And my job, I felt, was like to try to encourage them to go through it. And there are the ones who listened very well and they challenged me. Are you telling us that you have peace partners on the other side who are settlers? Why they are settlers? Why they are still settlers? And then we had questions and conversations. And the most important thing I will say now that I learned in the beginning of my work, that there is nothing I can say to any Palestinian to make him or her change their mind about the other side and seeing that there are partners. I realized at some point that my job only to bring them to meet Hanan or to meet Shaul or to meet others, and then they realize that there is a human being and a partner on the other side. So many times I thought that if I quote the stories that I have listened to and the experiences, I will help many people on my side to change their mind, to open up, to listen. But that's me trying to convince them, and usually it turns into an argument between us Palestinians. So yes, that's how the situation.
As difficult as it is to be an Israeli Jewish settler peace activist, it's still much harder for Noor, I think, for Palestinians in general, than it is for Israelis. There have been absolutely no threats to me, nothing. There have been people who have said that they deeply disagree with the work and it's traitorous, but no one has done anything to me. I've lost a few friends. I've gained hundreds of more friends on both sides, Israelis and Palestinians. And of course, I've gained thousands of friends around the world through the work that we do. I will tell you that I've been a rabbi my whole life. In Israel, being a rabbi in 95% of the cases does not mean having a congregation. It rather means being a teacher in different frameworks of Jewish education. So I've been teaching in colleges of Jewish studies for my whole life. And today there are certainly institutions that probably would not want to hire me because of my work. And I'll also tell you that in the settlement where I live, there are many, many lectures and classes given voluntarily by the hundreds of rabbis who live in the settlement. And for a decade, I taught a weekly class on the Sabbath, on the Shabbat, on the weekly Torah portion. And because of my work, that was discontinued.
So we have two questions that are related to the two-state solution. One is, what challenges do you see currently to the two-state solution? And the other one is, do you imagine it being possible to have a borderless, it says Holy Land here, but I'm going to say whole land, without territories and divisions, rather than a two-state solution? It seems like a two-state solution would perpetuate bigotry.
Everything that we talked about for the last 1 hour and a half, the challenges, the mindset, the psychology on both sides is itself an obstacle to any solution, not just the two-state solution. Now, of course, there are the obstacles on the ground, the way how we are going to agree on the border, agree or disagree on borders, the settlements, the connection of both people to the entire land. But the mindset that exists on both sides right now, and this exclusivism that we are talking about in thinking that I am right, that I connect and the other side does not connect, this is the number one obstacle to reach any settlement or any solution. And I will add my opinion, this is my personal opinion, that there are Palestinians and Israelis, of course, who wanted to be pragmatic and wanted to move on and have a solution. I think that a large part also of why solution did not happen is that those voices on both sides were delegitimized for a long time. They are very weak right now. Anyone talks about a solution doesn't really make sense while they are killing us, while they are doing this to us, while they are actually planning to, on both sides, they are planning to annihilate us or to get rid of us. You think about talking about peace. So that's again part of the mentality, the mindset. But what I wanted to add personally is also the way how regional politics and international politics also affect us and affect our region. We are in the middle of a very contested or very there's a lot of conflicts around us. And Israel and Palestine conflict, the Palestinian conflict is in the heart, in the middle of the Middle Eastern conflict. We have Iran and we have the US, and we have the US policy toward Israel and the Middle East. That's also part of the obstacles that we are dealing with and we are facing.
Here's a very specific challenge to peace. There are two contradictory needs that we have on the table. On the one hand, as you heard, many Israelis are connected to the whole land from the river to the sea. And many Palestinians, even more Palestinians and Israelis, are connected to the whole land from the river to the sea. And what that means is that a solution has to give the Palestinians the whole land and has to give Israelis the whole land. That's possible if we have a one-state solution. If we have one state from the river to the sea, that's a binational state, a secular country that includes all the inhabitants of the land. But on the other hand, the vast majority of Israelis and the majority, but not the vast majority of Palestinians, both feel that their identities require a sovereign state that represents them. In other words, that there has to be an Israeli Jewish state and there has to be a Palestinian state. So now how do you square the circle? Both sides need the whole land, but both sides also need their own sovereign state. That's a paradox we can't solve. But yes, we can. Believe it or not, we can. And the beginning of the answer is in the second question. I'll explain. Noor and I are both members of a political movement that's not Roots. It's a separate movement, but it's deeply connected. It's called A Land for All. And the plan they put on the table is called Two States, One Homeland. And what this is, it is two states, an Israeli state and a Palestinian state. In other words, that's a two-state solution, but it's not two separate states. It's two intertwined states. And here the important word is confederation. Like the European Union, for example, Germany and France. There is a border between Germany and France, and there will be a border between the state of Palestine and the state of Israel, but a soft border. A soft border means that under the best case scenario, you can move from one side to the other without being checked. It's a porous border. It's on the map, but you can move. In addition to the freedom of movement, the second salient factor is freedom of residency. In the European Union, if you're French, it's not only that you can go and visit Germany without being checked at the border, it's that you can go and live in Germany your whole life without ever needing to get German citizenship. The same thing in the Confederation approach, that there will be open residency, which means you can be a Palestinian born in Israel and Tel Aviv, let's say, or born in Palestine in Ramallah, or born on Long Island, and you can come home to Palestine, get Palestinian citizenship, and then you live your whole life in the state of Israel as a citizen of Palestine and a resident of Israel, voting in Palestinian national elections and Israeli local municipal elections. And you can be a Jew born in Israel and Tel Aviv, or born in Alon Shvut, where I live, or born on Long Island, and come home and get Israeli citizenship and live your whole life in the Palestinian state. Having Israeli citizenship and voting in Israeli national elections and voting in Palestinian local elections as a Palestinian resident. What this does, it squares the circle because it gives each side their own sovereign state to express their identity, but also gives enough of connection to the whole pie, to the whole land from the river to the sea, so that people will not feel that their identities have been ripped from them. They have the whole land to visit, even to live in, and they have the citizenship not only in their own state, but in the confederacy. That's not a good word. In the union, in the confederation that controls the whole land. Now, of course, this is a pipe dream. You'll say it'll never be. It requires trust. But all peace settlements will require trust, and the work of Roots is to establish the trust that will allow this political settlement to become real.
So you come to our next set of questions, which oddly enough ended up being related. There was a question about what level of interest there is among Israeli leadership for reconciliation, and there was a question marveling at the transformation that occurred for each of you because of your willingness to risk listening and risk what would happen to your own sense of truth and identity from listening. How do you foster that experience in others, in average citizens, and in particular, folks who have the position and authority to be making decisions?
One of the ways that we were thinking, and we are thinking about it, is that basically that center that we have created in the last 10 years, we needed to replicate that by creating other centers in the West Bank. That's one of the ways to scale up the work, to bring more people into the work of reconciliation, to humanize the other side, and also to accept the other side with the fullness of their national and religious identity. But that is not enough. We are not saying here that only the grassroots work and only like after 20 years, 30 years, we will come and then we will reach like a tipping point and then we will have peace. In my opinion, that work we are doing now is required, is important. It's important this year. It was important last year, before the 7th of October, after the 7th of October, but it's not enough. There must be a political process at the same time that will create the ground, the right atmosphere for such work to succeed. Rabbi Hanan mentioned that we are the only organization in the West Bank, and there's a lot of difficulties, like technical and logistical difficulties that we deal with. And there is another 140 peace organizations, and I'm not trying to undermine the work we are doing, but clearly we are not succeeding. The situation is getting from bad to worse in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And since you mentioned the leadership, the Israeli leadership, I can say as a Palestinian and as member of Roots, are not partners of peace. They are not people who are working toward peace. They are not people who are actually interested to have a genuine peace agreement between both nations and to live in peace. And you can have a lot of criticism to the Palestinian leadership. We have Hamas in Gaza, and we have the Palestinian Authority. We have, first of all, divided leadership. In my words, in my opinion, as Noor, we have a leadership that lost vision, like lost any vision, that cannot really lead, in my opinion. And I have a lot of criticism to say. One of them, there is no, we as Palestinians, we're living in a situation in where it's even hard for us to choose our leadership because we are living a national struggle. We are not citizens of a state. There is no democratic process at the same time. We are living like freedom fighters and trying to get liberation, and at the same time building a state, and we don't have the basics for people to choose the leadership to elect them. So there's clearly a problem on both leaderships. Now, I would not put the Palestinian Authority have many problems, but I'm not saying I would put them equally on the level with the most right-wing government in Israel history right now. And the ministers and Benjamin Netanyahu have been also controlling the situation for the last 12 years. That's part of the problem as well. And so what's needed, and what I hope is in the next few months from now, that there will be some sort of a political process that will be enforced because of the circumstances on the ground, but also because of the Arab countries and because of the United States maybe changing its policy or its attitude toward the situation, that would allow the creation of a new leadership on both sides We know already that the current Israeli leadership will not last once the war is over, will not stay in power. There will be elections in Israel and they will change. And even though that most of the people on both sides are traumatized and fearful and they are not going to support leadership that will talk about peace, but definitely the new leadership that we will have will be more moderate than what we have right now, in my opinion, in my personal opinion. So that's what needed. We have the work on the grassroots. We need to scale it up. There are many things also to say, but I will just give chance for Hanan. I think the funding is also a very important part of it, right? The funding.
So I will say that Noor talks for me, and we'll begin a closing. We want to show the next slide. What we want to do now is show you, I think it's 4 or 5 slides that answer the question, what can you do? Some of you may want to take pictures of them if you interested. I'll just say 1 or 2 points in each of them. So let's go to the next slide. Well, the slide we're about to see tells you that our website is friendsofroots.net, friendsofroots.net. Everyone together, friendsofroots.net. Very good. So we have the slide there. Another thing it says, look us up on Facebook, go to our website, invite us to speak in other churches, synagogues, mosques, universities. Spread the word. If you heard something here that you think was interesting, important, exciting, inspirational, tell others to invite us to their communities around the U.S. We can go to the next slide. You see here that we can also do Zoom presentations for institutions. We do them very often. You see there that my personal website, ravhanan.org, has more information beyond what you heard tonight and beyond what the Roots website says. And you see here that we have an American Friends of Roots, an organization here in the U.S. that Saskia is a founding member, actually, of the board. It's been about 6 years, I don't know. A little bit more. They meet once a month by Zoom, and they help us out with their wisdom, with their wealth, with their experience. Sometimes it's legal experience, financial experience, publicity, and just board governance. So if you'd like to join us, you can be in contact right after or through the website. Let's go to the next slide. We have a campus affiliate called the Tidna, which is Arabic and Hebrew for our future. You can take a picture of the code that will help you to form a chapter, or perhaps through your children on one of the campuses around the U.S. We have, I think, on 4 different campuses right now. We'll mention at the bottom, it says, fill your Facebook page or social media with positive news. Everyone's spreading the bad news of hate, of war, of misunderstanding. Let others do that work. It'll get done, don't worry. Fill your social media with good news of the things you heard here, of other organizations building community, whether it's over there in the Holy Land or here in America, because good news creates more good news. Good news creates hope, and when people have hope, they may take responsibility. If they don't have hope, they'll never take responsibility. Let's go to the next slide, which I think is the last one. It is the last one. You can screen the film that you saw the trailer of. When you go to visit Israel, visit Palestine as well. If you go to visit Palestine, visit Israel as well. Create bridges, as I'm sure you're doing here on Long Island, between people of different ethnicities, different religions, different political viewpoints. It can change the world, and it's needed to change the world. 50-second summary. If you came here tonight as a strong supporter of Palestine, we hope you will leave as a strong supporter of Palestine. And if you came here tonight as a strong supporter of Israel, we hope you will leave as a strong supporter of Israel. But the thing is, this is our hope, that you don't leave as a strong supporter of one side at the expense of the other side. Because if Israel does not get what it needs, wants, and deserves, the Palestinians will not get what they need, want, and deserve. And if the Palestinians don't get what they need, want, and deserve, Israel will not get what it needs, wants, and deserves. And therefore, our final message is pro-Israel and pro-Palestine. That's really the only way to be pro a better future for both sides. Thank you.
On behalf of all of the sponsors, I, Cecily Broderick Iguerra, the priest in charge of Christ Church Sag Harbor, thank you for being here this evening. It is important that we commit to this cause. And by this cause, I speak not just of the incredible work that Roots is doing, but what is at the heart of it. Because the truth is, we have disagreements here, do we not? We have people who we consider to be other here, do we not? So, the sponsors of this evening ask you to keep your eyes out for an invitation for Sunday, April 14th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, where we will continue this conversation about how we can do deep listening, transformative learning, so that our security and peace are not at anyone else's expense. Thank you. Thank you for the incredible work that you do. I am certain that many of us will find ways to support you. Thank you for giving us a sense of hope and possibility in this tumultuous political season that we are in the United States, in the difficulties that we have with regard to race relations and religions getting along and economic challenges. You have given us a vision of possibility of what it means to live in what I might consider some of our lesser and more manageable difficulties, given your bravery and your situation. So thank you for sharing from the heart this evening.